All right, everybody, it's podcast time. Today I've got Mr. Larsen Jay. He is the incumbent in seat 10 and running to keep said seat, and we're going to talk about that and all the other things that are going on in the world. But first, I got to give you my standard spiel. We're almost in agreement. You can find us at almostinagreement at gmail.com. That's an easy way to get a hold of me. You can go to our website, almostinagreement.com. I've got our voter guide. I've got our jobs description sheet, if you will. That's our help you figure out who's, the what's, and the where's, what people can actually do in the job. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. We're on Instagram, sort of. That's a good way to get Facebook's the one I'm most used personally, but we have access on all those things as well. Go to your favorite podcast provider, get us there. That's a great way to help promote the show and tell other people about it. The more people subscribe, the better our reviews are, the higher it gets on searches for, local politics and stuff like that. So we're almost in agreement. Larsen Jay, seat 10, and we're going to talk about what's going on in that seat as soon as this intro gets out of the way. Larsen, buddy, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Oh, it's a work day, sort of, I guess. They're all work days, but I like doing these. I really enjoy doing the podcast, so as long as I get the day job.
Thanks for having me back on.
It's good to have you here. So, okay, well, I mean, let's do a quick mini bio of Larsen Jay and how he got to where he sits right now. We've had you on before, so it doesn't need to go as deep as we have before. But what did you do? What do you do in the day job? That kind of thing. What got you into politics?
Sure. Yeah. So I've had a real sort of storied career and a lot of different paths leading me to public service in a more formal way. But I'm really at the core of it. I'm a former film and television producer that, helped turn stories into reality and worked in feature film and television and documentaries and owned my own production company and worked in Los Angeles and all over the world and had a great career. And, the sort of first foray into early public service, was really being part of the renaissance of downtown in the early 2000s. Some people know me as the guy who brought the ice rink back down to Market Square and helped get movies on Market Square open and revitalize a building downtown and be part of that sort of early days of bringing our city back to life. And then, really got involved in more civic event, organizations, Bijou Theater, Joy Music School, Symphony, some of the other great organizations that fueled this community. And then from there, built a great career, but I had a near fatal accident in 2007 that I'm happy to have a second chance on life. And that led to the formation of the organization I'm most proud of, Random Acts of Flowers, and where I, found some lemonade out of the lemons that I was thrown and was able to take a near tragedy for my family and turn it into something great and help build that organization from the ground up. Ultimately, sort of abandoned my career, went in and see if I could nudge the world a little bit and built a great organization which still flourishes to this day and has helped hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people and is growing nationwide. Ran that organization for 13 years and then transitioned it to new leadership at the appropriate time and re-entered the private sector, where I am now the director of business alliances for a firm called PYA, which is a top 100 tax accounting audit and management consulting firm. And so I do business development, special projects, and help them grow and really help companies thrive in East Tennessee. But really all of my, public service shifted from more sort of community minded to a more formal way through the years in just helping in the community and realizing how important local government was. And I'd never been involved in politics in a formal way, but I was a little fed up with some of our leadership and I saw an opportunity to step in and serve. And so I went from literally never having been involved in politics to deciding to run countywide, which was attractive to me because I've lived or worked in most every part of Knox County and really try to think about big picture issues. And so I threw my hat in the ring. I worked really hard. I prepared a lot for being a commissioner and ultimately was just thrilled that I was selected to become a county commissioner at large. So I've been in that role for 3.5 years now. I'm seeking re-election this year for another term and hope to keep serving the people of Knox County.
Awesome. That covers all the bases of the big broad question. I like
to go back to the other episodes, and I probably said a lot more. So.
Well, I mean, I think, like you said, I think there's an importance to local politics, and at least in my opinion, there is there's low engagement. We'll put it that way, I guess, to be nice. And that's what got me going and doing this, is because I wanted to get more engaged, and the contact and the standard methods to do so seem to be missing. So I figured I'd try to fill said gap.
And I want to clarify one thing. Like,
go ahead.
To me, this is public service. The politics is the process, is the noise, is the muck around it. But like at the end of the day, and I think this really separates candidates across the board, is, there are people that are running for political office for political reasons. And then there's people like me who are real. I consider this public service. This is a commitment to my community and my country. It's not about the politics. It's about what do we do to make our community better and serve. I think those are two different avenues and two different approaches.
Right. I mean, I always joke that we're a governance podcast. We just have to deal with politics as a consequence. And that's the reality. I mean, especially in local politics, it's gotten a little bit more political than it has in the past, as I understand it. But at the end of the day, the politics is the art of getting the job, and the governance is the job. And, as much as logic would say that, especially with someone like yourself who's an incumbent, it's track record. It's things like these that say we can or can't do the job. But I mean, the problem with me in trying to simplify this, I suppose, is to me, politics is, like I said, it's the art of getting the job. And it's just such a weird thing, because I can tell you what I want to do. It's like I could say what I want to do or what I would do in that position, but nobody's in that position until they are. Nobody has experience on county commission until they do. Yeah. And so, and it's not a what's the phrase they use? Institutional experience. I'm not pro or con on institutional experience, but there is something to that, because one of the things that has been most frustrating with me through not just this political cycle, but the city races, as well as back then in the 20 races, which you weren't a part of, the race part of it at least, is that we have we have an issue with candidates running on things that their seat doesn't do.
Yeah, well, that happens all the time. And again, that's really why it's the people, are you running because you want to be elected to something, or are you running because you want to make an impact on something? I tell you what, when I went, when I decided to run, I'd spent 6 months even thinking about, should I do this? Should I not? Trying to understand what is the role of a commissioner, trying to talk to people and better understand it. But the whole process for me it was almost 18 months from even looking into it until I actually was sworn in. And there was so much work I did to learn the role of a commissioner, to sit through meetings month after month after month, no matter how long it took, to go to each department head and say, what do you do? How does this relate to the commission? To sit down with each commissioner, to sit down with the budget and finance directors, to really kind of like reverse engineer it and go, what can I do to better understand this? So on minute one, when I'm sworn in, which you have to make decisions literally on minute one, right? How can I be the most effective and preparing to learn the role of commissioner? And there are people, that are running that don't know what we do. And some that are running for commission that, they're talking about things that are state issues, there's federal issues, there's school board issues. They're like, okay, guys, you don't even get the 101 basics. And so you can promise anything, you can say anything. Unfortunately, most people probably don't know the basics either. And so that's the hard part is, there's times where I hear interviews or listen to your podcast and I kind of scream at like, come on, we don't even do that. Or you have no idea.
And that's that's like one of my kind of goals is to try to figure that out. And I guess since you spent that 18 months and now 4 years in the seat, if let's just pretend for a second that you're not currently running, what are the top 5 things that are in the commissioner's wheelhouse in that seat? Like what is the day-to-day of the job? I reference you all the time on this one because I think it's the best answer I've gotten in all sorts of conversation is the commissioner is the switchboard operator. It's one of my favorite.
We're the information traffic cop for the citizens of Knox County.
Oh, you changed your cool phrase, man.
Whatever the case may be, but we are. We are the conduit between a really complicated government and a and a citizenry who really wants representation or to fix an issue. Almost everything we do is not partisan. Almost everything we do is direct constituent services. It's Betty in Halls wants a road paved. Bob in Farragut is worried about pedestrian safety. It's budgetary things, whatever. And when you become a commissioner, you are expected to be a subject matter expert in about 30 things on minute one. And so being a commissioner is about listening, about answering the phone, about answering an email, about showing to the event, about not having all the answers, but saying, I will find out, helping people on the most basic level with the most basic needs. And then layer upon layer upon layer of that onion as you dig deeper. You get into policy, you are prepping for meetings, you're learning about land use, you're understanding the balance between growth and development, you're looking at finance reports, you're looking at audit reports, you're understanding the rules of checks and balances and the role of a commissioner. I mean, it changes every single day and every single week. And some weeks are dominated by one particular topic, some months, some years. And then other times, in the same meeting, we might be working on bond issues and talking about, interest rates at a finance meeting at 3. We might be doing talking about beer board and the role of law enforcement versus underage drinking at 4, and then getting into policy and, big picture legislative issues at 5. And then at 7, talking about land use and discussion of zoning and growth and infrastructure. I mean,
right. And about 1 a.m. you get to start talking about, you're still talking about the health department.
Yeah. And then at midnight, you're still, arguing about something else. I mean, and so the role of a commissioner is to be well-versed, well-rounded, well-educated, well-experienced, but also be responsive. I cannot tell you how many times I hear from people that say, you're the only one that ever emailed me back. You're the only one that ever answered your phone. You're the only one that ever comes to a meeting. Whether you agree or disagree, I work for the people of Knox County, and I, take that very, very seriously. That's why I work really hard at it. I built a direct constituent website. I answer emails. I answer phone calls. I go to meetings. I connect with people on social media. I try to report every single month to the constituents of Knox County what I do. I think that they deserve accountability. I think they deserve to understand, who their elected officials are, what they're doing. And I also think it's okay to say, I don't know, and go say, I'll find out, I'll figure it out, I'll come back and, I'll help you the best I can.
Right. Because again, I think in all of that, I think the as I'm getting a better understanding of it, the top things that a commissioner does actually do within the job title kind of thing tend to be the least paid attention to. Because I think land use is the big one, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But to me, if I was to break it down, I think it's land use. That's the number one thing that I think the commission actually makes significant meeting by meeting real impacts on what's going on in Knox County above all the other content that ends up in some of these meetings.
Yeah, that's a big one. Finance and budgeting and management of that, being a fiduciary and a good steward of the resources given to us. That's a huge one. Understanding the legal aspects of who we are, what we do, what we're responsible for, and what we can and can't do. That's a big part of it. Some years and some days, it's about health policy. Other years, it's about, when I first came on commission, we had a multi-month row about, feral cat policies and, animal control. I mean, it changes all the time.
Right, City's doing animal control right now, which is a fun one to watch.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. I think the point is you have to be versatile, you have to be engaged in the process, and you have to have a fine balance between doing your own research, relying on the bureaucratic system, which is institutional knowledge, and at the same time trying to form your own opinion based on what you think is best for the county. So it is you are constantly on this sort of wheel balancing with a rolling pin underneath, Yeah. And I mean, I think we talked about it last time, and I think, again, staying on the land use topic for at least a minute, I think that is one of the biggest things that the commission does. And I think especially probably there's been a significant shift since last time we talked about how much demand there is for Knox County land and how we manage. I think when we first talked, I was the planning commission was saying we were going to have 100 to 200,000 more people here in the next 10 years, and they were pretty close.
Right, except we still have 8 more years to get there. Yeah, because I make the joke all the time. If they would have done the census in the summer of 21 instead of the summer of 20, I think we would have it would be hugely different than what we already saw between on that 20 census. And so again, I think to me, as I'm looking at candidates for my own kind of, you're an at-large. I get to vote you, right? So. And so that I think to me that I think the simple one is the big three, and we'll talk about each of them. Is how we're going to manage this growth, how we're going to manage the infrastructure to go along with this growth, and how we're going to pay for it. Yeah. So let's start at the beginning of at least my little list. Let's start at land use. How do we continue to manage this growth in a way that's responsible for the current homeowners as well as getting inventory up and making, because I think one of the issues that everybody talks about, but nobody puts the two together is one of the things that's been great about Knox County has been cost of living. And when you've got a 2-bedroom house going for $450 or something like that out in the country at this point, cost of living is going up quick. And so how do we get this? How do we keep this thing rolling responsibly? What are your thoughts?
Well, this is the ultimate balancing act, and you have imagine you had a switchboard with different dials, and one of them was inventory, and one of them was price, and one of them was quality of life. As you turn one, the other two are going to react. And if you have really low inventory, which is what we have now, last year the Realtor Association came and said we were 30 to 40 units behind last year in inventory. I think recently they talked about 15 to 20,000 units behind. So as inventory decreases, prices go up. So how do you affect prices? You have more inventory and more choices for people to make, and so that your house prices don't continue to just rise and rise and rise, and demand doesn't just drive those prices into an unobtainable level. Well, but then if you have inventory go up, perhaps your quality of life dial goes down a little bit because people go, well, geez, there's that much more traffic. There's that many more people. There's a pressure on the schools. There's a pressure on the commercial industry. There's a pressure on the workforce. Now, what's also interesting is add another dial, which is your workforce. Well, if you have companies that are, dying for workers, which is happening right now, we have more jobs available in Knox County than we've ever had, the lowest unemployment, and hungry for a workforce. If you need more workforce, then you have to have more inventory, you have to have lower prices, but you also have to have more growth. So these things don't work in vacuums. And I think a lot of candidates get really naive by saying, oh, I'm just going to do X and it's going to solve the problem. Like every time you turn one dial, it affects the other ones, and it has a ripple effect. And so, growth is going to happen whether you like it or not. Now, your environment makes a difference to that. There's a lot of socioeconomic issues, political issues. There's 1,000 factors, but it's going to happen. How will you manage it, and how will you embrace it, and what will you do with that growth? But the idea that you're the last one to build and no one else gets to come in and pull up the drawbridge, that's not realistic. The idea that I don't want you to tell me what to do with my land, but make sure you tell that farmer not to do something with his. That doesn't work either. We have property rights, we have laws. So I think you're right. It is the biggest issue that we face all the time. But it's, the alternative is far worse. There are a lot of communities all across the country that have zero growth, and their only way to build resources is just continue to tax the people that are there, and it gets worse and worse and worse. So I think growth is a good thing. I think it's something to be embraced and to work through. I don't see it as always as a negative.
See, I'm not sure. I go back and forth. I think I think there is a part of me that feels like there is needed to have a discussion about how much growth we want. And again, I wholly understand we don't get to technically control that specifically. We can't be like, no, you can't move here. But there's part of me that would like to hear a little conversation from the community about how much growth the community actually wants.
Now, it's a great example that what you just said of let's say there's another factor to this. Let's say the community says we really want new schools. Take Gibbs, for instance. Gibbs, for years, said we need a new middle school and a new elementary school. And the county said, great. And we invested huge amounts of money, built 2 brand new schools. What comes with new schools? Growth.
Right.
People that want to go to the new schools. Well, now they're in this battle of, hey, I don't want anybody else to move here. I don't want to build any of these places. But wait, you have the new schools. That's attractive to families. That's going to come with it. You can't have one without the other.
Right, and it kicked up your property value in the process too, so you can't be mad at that part either.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know, like that's to me, again, like I think this growth thing is I understand there's not like a silver bullet answer, but I can't quite wrap my head around how we really go about doing this. And, again, and trying to differentiate a candidate to me, that's the question I want to know. Like how, like what specifics are, at least maybe a better way to ask the question would be like, when you're seeing maybe a land use adjustment in a commission meeting, what factors are like top of your list to consider on whether you're going to allow a land use adjustment?
I think some of the big factors are, does this seem appropriate given what's around it in the surrounding community? If you have, everything surrounding it is 3 units an acre and somebody wants to put up, something that's 9 units an acre duplex, does it seem to fit? I mean, that's the first thing. I always go and drive out and look at all the properties and look at all the facilities just to see. I mean, there's a big one coming up in South Knoxville where it's the lowest density I've ever seen asked for a housing development. But when you actually drive out there, you realize like right in the middle of it is this huge industrial complex. So on paper, it seems really weird, but when you walk out and knock and actually visualize it, you go, oh, okay, this makes sense of why this is the way it is. I look at the inventory and the housing reports. I keep up closely with the real estate community to better understand how inventory and housing reports or housing data, affects the greater good of prices and inflation and all the things that we've talked about. I look at where the growth is, and I look at the report. I mean, look, we have an entire planning department first as a staff that literally go through and give staff reports of, we've looked at the roads, we've looked at the schools, we looked at this, we looked at that, we looked at this. They put a huge amount of data into each one of those reports and say, based on everything we know and our expertise in growth and planning, we recommend X. Then it goes to a 14-member body, I think 15-member body at the Planning Commission. And then they debate it and they go through it and they put their notes on it. And so we're the last stop. It has gone through 6 or 8 or 10 eyeballs before it's gotten to us. And so I put a lot of weight into what they recommend because they are subject matter experts and they spend a lot of time on it. And then ultimately, there's 1,000 other factors that have to do with, the what and the why. But I'm a free market property rights person. It's not my job to determine whether I want to live in that house or not. If somebody wants to buy a crappy house from a crappy builder in a crappy part of the area that always floods, if it's legal, that's not my problem. Like I don't want to be the taste police. Would I buy that house? No, but that's not my job. Is like if the market wills it, they will buy it. So I try to put myself in the position of the free market. I also try to really factor the fact is that we have a property rights system of government. Like you own your house, right? You have a right to sell that house. Now you might have a half an acre of land, but you might have 300 acres of land. That might be your retirement. It might be your kids or your grandkids' college fund. It might be your healthcare costs for that. Like you have a right to that asset. And when we start kind of determining what I like and don't like, or what my taste is versus the free market private property enterprise, it's a really slippery slope. And so just because somebody doesn't like it doesn't mean it's not legal or not right. Right.
And this to me shifts us on to part 2 of my series is the infrastructure issue. Because again, to me, on that same kind of free market ideal, if some developer has 300 acres that he bought from some guy retiring and sending his kids to college and all that kind of stuff, and he wants to put 2 houses an acre on all those acres, and so all of a sudden we have 600 houses out here, and it's an old country road to get in and out there. Well, you bought that house out there in it. Why do we as a county need to make it easier for you to get there?
Yeah, and sometimes we say, look, if you want to do this, you fix the road. Growth always happens first and infrastructure always happens second. Why? Because if we started building roads and huge infrastructure and spending massive amounts of taxpayer money in places that did not have growth, we would be lynched by the citizenry. They would come and say, why are you wasting all this money on an area. Just go out Rutledge Pike once. Drive Rutledge Pike from here all the way up to, Tri-Cities. It is a split, divided, massive, huge highway infrastructure bill with virtually nothing on it. Okay. Now, will it have growth one day? Sure. But growth, you wouldn't, if we had 15 or 20 years ago spent $30 or $40 million widening Harding Valley Road all the way to Watt Road from Pellissippi, people would have gone, "You're nuts. What are you doing? Why are you spending all that money out there? Nobody's out there."
Right.
Well, it changed overnight. People have to remember Cedar Bluff 30 years ago was a goat pasture.
Yep, I remember.
I mean,
not 30 years ago, but I remember when the Kingston Pike Cedar Bluff intersection was two big farms on either side of Cedar Bluff, and there was nothing in there.
So, it's going to happen how you manage it, how you do it, but infrastructure always follows where the growth is. Schools, infrastructure, we have a system in place and we have a tax structure in place that says, we are going to develop as best we can with the growth that we have as fast as we can to catch up. And the other thing I think that is really important is people have to understand we're in a very unique, and this is where understanding government is so important. And I've heard candidates talk about things that, gosh, again, have nothing to do with us. You have to understand, take Shad Road as a project, right? Okay, you're talking about county and state. And so there's an entire section that hasn't been done. Why? Because it's TDOT, and the state works on a glacial pace with a whole bunch of extra regulations and a whole bunch of different money and a whole bunch of different time. And so we have roads that go from city roads to state roads to county roads, back to state roads, back to, the next district over. And it's really complicated. It's not as simple as going, just build a road. This is local government is really good, really complicated, and really important, but it's not a simple fix by any means.
Like one of my businesses is on North Shore. Yeah. And it floods. It floods real bad all the time, right? And we get all sorts of weird stuff, and it's in the floodplain. And for some reason, we can't get the city to approve a facade redo and all sorts of craziness because the poor developer, not the poor business owner, building owner, not business owner, that's me, but the poor business owners got his architect going to the city, going to the county, going to the state, going back to the city, going to the county, going to the environmental office, going here, going there, trying to get approval to just change some glass on the front of his building because there's so many layers on top of that particular piece of property. And again,
just because somebody wills it doesn't mean it can happen. It doesn't. You don't get just to snap your fingers and go, "Well, it should be this." Well, it isn't. So work with it, figure it out.
And so, okay, so in that you mentioned that sometimes we will let the developers, maybe that's not the best word, but the developers end up doing some of the infrastructures for us when they're doing these big massive developments. And so I guess just to be frank on it is Dylan was in here talking about how, we don't know these developers are going to do things correctly. And then in separate conversations I've had with other people, there's the question of, well, after the developer gets it done and then it falls onto our responsibility as far as our engineering and roads crew having to keep up with it. It's it's a gift on the front end, but it's still a cost that we have to keep up with long term.
Well, let me separate those two things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is a perfect example of if you don't know what you're talking about and candidates just blurt stuff out, then it really, really shows why, experience matters. Whenever a private entity does infrastructure on a public level, they have to issue bonds. They have to go through approved contractors. They have to submit plans to the Engineering and Public Works Department that are to spec. They have to do the work. They have to be inspected. That bond guarantees that work is done correctly. It has to pass XYZ certifications to be turned over to the county. The county will only accept it if it is 100% according to spec as they would build it, per the regulations, per the codes, per the infrastructure. It gets turned over, and then, yes, it becomes a county road, but it's just like a subdivision. All those subdivision roads, those are Knox County roads. Every single subdivision is built, becomes a Knox County road, and it gets turned over to the county. We approve them every month, but the engineering department makes sure that those are done according to spec, with a bond, with backup, so that it is done just like we would do it. But the difference is, the private industry is doing it well before we would even touch it. We had one of these issues last month where the developer was going to put in sidewalks, put in a roundabout, widen the road. it was that particular section of town was not going to be on our radar for another 10 or 15 years.
Right.
So this is one of those tools. Growth can also spur an infrastructure, because if the private sector is willing to do the infrastructure on our behalf at their expense, ultimately the consumer's expense, because it'll be rolled into the project, then you can get a lot of infrastructure done faster. But it absolutely is done according to how they would build it if we did it ourselves. It's just done by the private sector.
Right. And the presumption being is that when that development hits the tax rolls, the increased in tax income will offset the cost of maintaining those roads in the future. I mean, it makes sense. It sounds good. I mean, that's one that I don't have the depth of knowledge to pick that apart, other than to follow, like, because again, it goes back to we were talking free market stuff earlier. So some developer wants to build something out in the sticks and put 600 houses out there, and the first complaint from people trying to buy houses is it's hard to get in and out of that neighborhood. Well, fix it. Why is that going to fall on my lap because I live on the other side of town?
Exactly. Well, and look, we are all in one society together in Knox County, and what affects you does affect somebody else, and vice versa. And infrastructure, schools, growth, budget, finances. I mean, these are all things that are intertwined. So everybody doesn't live in a vacuum, and so you have to think about the big picture with every decision, and you have to think about how does this help the overall community, not just one particular group that may or may not like things.
Right. And to go back for just a second, I think part of what you're talking about as far as doing infrastructure before the growth, I think a lot of that falls under the politics category more than the governance category, because that looks like a waste of money now. And where had we done that Hardin Valley, like you were saying at the time, it would have been like, oh, that guy was a genius, but that was 15 years ago, and they're not in politics anymore, so they don't get the benefit of getting reelected off of their genius move.
Well, and also you have to look at, what is the available funding you have to you. If a community has decided, if all of Hardin Valley wants to rise up and march down to the mayor's office and say, we demand a tax increase so that you put $120 million of infrastructure into our community, great, go for that. Have you ever seen that happen? No. Ever. And so, you work within the boundaries that you have. In our case, we have been on a train for 23 years, which is do not increase the property tax increase, grow and put the infrastructure in place as best you can and catch up along the way. I mean, that's what this community has decided. And so that's what we do. If you don't like that, feel free to change it.
Right. And so on that, 20 something years plan and stuff like that, I've heard some conversation about there's a new 30-year plan getting kind of put together. Cause I think that's another one that I think that would be helpful, especially if we have good engagement on people understanding what it is. Mm-hmm. So where are you at on this new growth plan or trying to implement a long-term vision with, some, incremental kind of stepping points?
I'm absolutely in favor of it, because to quote the Beatles, if you don't know where you're going, any road will do. And so you have to have a vision. You have to have a chart. You have to have a graph. You have to have a growth plan. You have to figure out what you want to look like down the road. One of the big issues that we've had is, imagine this like Big Mac, sandwich with different layers. We've had growth plans, policy plans, sector plans, transportation plans. We've had all these plans. Half of them are expired or old or outdated and haven't been kept with. The others are often confusing and conflict with the other ones. And so finally, Knox County sort of came together and said, look, we've got to simplify this. We've got to sort of get rid of all this layers of the Big Mac and get down to kind of a quarter pounder, and with one set of vision, one set of plans, simplify it, make sure we're doing it. And then also don't update it every 30 years. Let's put it together and update it every 10 years so that we're adapting in a much faster way. So it's a huge project. It's way overdue. We've allocated a lot of funding towards it. And yes, if the community gets involved, I think it's a wonderful thing to help shape your community. I also think that you have to be adaptable and nimble. 10 years ago, we lived differently. We worked differently. We did transportation differently. 10 years from now, we may not be in the same transportation mode. We may not be in the same housing mode. So I think you have to, you got to be a bit more nimble than just putting out a 30-year plan. You got to try to really dial it in and say, what do we generally want out of the quality of life of our community? And then how do we achieve that through, thoughtful, rational decisions?
Right. Zoom didn't exist 5 years ago. I mean,
the podcast didn't. I mean, iPhones 10 years ago. I mean, we're in a different world. I mean, honestly, I don't know what it's going to look like 10 years from now. And so, it's really interesting because at this time of year, the politician answers and the politician questions always come out. Would you ever do this? Would you not do that? Everybody always makes all these promises. Come on. You don't have a clue what the world's going to look like. By the time you're elected in August and then you actually get to your first budget next April or May, God knows what the world's going to look like. Look at the last 2 years. 2 years ago, we were doing nothing in February.
Right.
So, we all have to sort of stop talking in absolutes and start talking about good and smart policy and how you would approach things. I would much rather hear from candidates about how they would do something versus what they will and won't do, because those are just empty promises to me.
Right. And so we're to follow that to try to put you on the spot to make me an empty promise. You kind of implied it in what we were talking about there, and that growth is going to do the tax increase, not a percentage property tax increase. But correct me if I'm wrong, your intent is you don't have the intent to raise property tax at this point.
This community is not interested in it. This mayor is not interested in it. It's not even a discussion item, and it's not on the table. So it's not even really worth, promising or not promising. What I do every year is when we sit down with the budget, and we do this in our finance committee, we do this in our budget hearings, we do that, is you look at what does the revenue look like? What are the needs of the community? How do you best achieve those needs? What are the priorities? And, how do you balance all of those things together? It concerns me greatly that our debt keeps rising at a far faster pace than our revenues. At some point that will catch up. If anybody says we will never have a property tax increase and we'll never do anything different, they're just flat out lying to you. This community at some point will realize you can't have declining or flat revenues or barely enough revenues with a growing county and then continue to rack up massive amounts of debt and not have that be, an issue. Everyone says I'm a fiscal conservative. Well, what does that really mean? To me, being a fiscal conservative means being a good steward of the money, being not wasteful, and really saying, what can I do to maximize the impact on the community with the available funds and balancing all of those things together. Being a fiscal conservative doesn't mean don't spend any money and sit back and wait. I don't know any business, Seth, at all, including yours or anyone else, that doesn't invest in infrastructure, doesn't invest in human capital, doesn't invest in customers, advertising, inventory, all of these things to get better. And, things have cost more. 23 years ago, your phone cost something a lot different than it does today. That microphone costs a lot different than it does today. So I think it's worth better saying, how do you approach fiscal responsibility? How do you determine where and where you're going to spend money? That's the better question than just saying, will you or won't you? Because I don't know what next year is going to look like, or the next year, or the next year.
Right, and again, I think that's the more honest answer. I think makes sense. But I think one of those, as I talk to neighbors, as I've talked to different candidates who talk about their experience going into door knocking and stuff like that. One of the things is are you going to raise taxes? That's just a generic question.
It's a politician's question and a politician's answer. You can't stand there and say, I back the blue and I want to pay officers more. I back teachers and I want to pay them more. We got to get better infrastructure. We need new schools. We got to and then go, well, I'm never going to raise your taxes. You can't do it. It's a lie. You can't. It's about good financial management. And I just really wish we would get out of these absolutes and talk about the big picture.
Right. Okay, I agree with most of those statements, but okay. So I want to shift a little bit because you know me, I'm curious about the whole thing, not just the governance and stuff like that. So, let's go into the actual politics, as I described my version of what I see politics as is how you get the job. And it's a countywide race for you, so you've got a lot of ground to cover as far as making sure people are aware of who you are and what election and the dates and all that kind of stuff. And so when you're out on the actual campaign trail campaigning, obviously everybody's raising money and stuff like that. But sure. For you, is there a strategy on how you're going about raising money and then how you're going about getting the word out about your campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, running for office is 100% completely different than actually governing. And it's, you almost have to treat it as two separate jobs, altogether. What I do is I go out and I ask for support for the community. I'm really proud that I have over 605, I think the last count, 606 donors across the county at all levels. Some are $5 and some are maxed out at the max. But what I do is I go out and I don't, I ask, look, do you think I'm doing a good job? Do you want me to continue to represent you? You understand that running a campaign costs money. It costs money to basically do marketing and advertising of yourself. And would you be willing to invest in me so that I can market and advertise myself and hopefully earn enough votes to continue to represent you? It's a really simple, do you support me and do you like the job I'm doing? And then people react. And I've worked really hard at that. And I don't apologize for how much money I've raised and how many people are on my list. I see it as a badge of honor. There's that many people that believe in me and believe in good government and want somebody like me to represent them. And then you turn that and you put together a plan, just like I did the first time, where you say, okay, this is a really big county. We've got a lot of coverage. Sometimes you can do more retail and door-to-door and more engagement with events and community service and, all kinds of things on a one-on-one level. And sometimes you just have to mass advertise through mailers. You got to put your message out through advertising on, billboards or TV or radio or direct pieces. And then you do your best to market and advertise yourself and say, here's who I am. Here's my credentials. Here's my background. Here's my record. Here's what I've actually accomplished. And if you think that I'm somebody that can deliver you rational, thoughtful leadership in an effective way, I would appreciate your vote. And that's, you just put your chips on the table and you hope enough people think that you're doing a good enough job. And you never know. I mean, you even as an incumbent, you run every day like you have no idea if people are going to vote for you or not. Right. And then you hope for the best.
Well, because I think it's one of those that just as a layperson, I see numbers like $200,000. I'm looking at your January 16th filing, or whatever. It's like old balance, new income, for lack of a better word, total receipts this period, and then total disbursements this period. And I'm looking at it, like I'm trying to think of this as, from the business perspective that I come from, and like these are big numbers, and it's
big numbers. But if you start really breaking down how many people you've got to reach across the county and what that breaks down to, it adds up really fast. Right now you're at like 50 cents a Knox County resident, give or take. Yeah. And so, but just take the primary, right? If you do one mailing to all the Republican super voters, which is, people that have voted in the last 3 to 4 elections, they are expected to be your most likely people that'll show up, this election. That could cost $5,000 to $8,000 for one mailing. You do 3, 4, 5 mailings, and all of a sudden you're spending $40,000 or $50,000 just to get different messages out. That's not. Then you start adding up yard signs. I mean, those big 4x4 yard signs are, $20, $25 a piece. You do 100 of those, you spend another $2,500. It adds up fast, and ultimately, if you have more resources, you can advertise more, and if you have less resources, then you do what you can.
Right. And we all watch the Super Bowl and we see who advertises the most, and they're the brands that we all know and we've known forever.
Sure.
That's how the marketing game works.
Buy a Pepsi this week because you saw them sponsor the halftime show?
Probably not. Maybe. Pepsi's awful.
I don't know. I don't either. But, that's the sort of mechanics of running. And then, of course, there's tons of, the back and forth, and, candidates make up stuff about each other, and they try to twist the truth, and they try to, here's what I always say to people. They say when their election season begins, I always ask them, try to identify people who are telling you what they're for and not what they're against. Anybody can be against something. Right now, I got one on the left and one on the right, and they're both against me. Get rid of that guy. I'll solve all your problems if you'll just get rid of him. Okay, well, what are you for? Well, I don't know, but get rid of that guy. He's awful. Well, okay. Tell me what you're for. The community, this is what I hear when I knock on doors. The community wants to know, tell me what you're for. Tell me what you've done. Tell me how you're going to make the community better. Tell me how you're going to answer my phone call. Tell me how you're going to get my road paved. Tell me what you're going to do to improve my life and be a good person in the meantime. And I'll back you up. They don't want to get into the minutia of like zoning laws. What they want to know is, are you truthful? Are you honest? Are you going to show up? And are you going to work on their behalf? And 90% of the time, that's the big issue is Do you feel like you're genuine, or are you just playing politics and trying to run to make yourself feel more important? Those are two different things.
I hear what you're saying on that. Because again, I think I understand the logical leap that people will make. Be like, oh, well, that guy got a bunch of money from company A, B, or C, and then 6 months down the line, something that may or may not involve company A, B, or C comes through commission. Sure. And, like trying to play both sides of it and trying to understand it from my perspective, I get the idea. Like it, and it's not like it's a rare premise in politics at large for anybody that pays any bit of attention. And so it is like, I don't know, like the Dems version of the database thing. Matt Scheer shared with me that they think that I'm huge on campaign finance reform, which I'm not sure if I am or not, but that's what their database kicked out about me. But I do think it's an interesting thing to follow, and I think it's important that people do consider the source and consider who is supporting a said candidate. But at the end of the day, the real question is that candidate an independent voice, or have they been bought? And I think, that is the art of politics, I suppose, as far as getting out there and talking to people and showing track record, like you mentioned before, that clears that image up, I suppose, for lack of a better way to say it.
Well, and look, anybody can insinuate everything, and anybody can accuse anyone of everything without having a back and forth and a rebuttal. I can tell you that I have, in my 3.5 years as a commissioner, I have never, ever had anybody that's ever donated to my campaign or anybody else's campaign ever pressure me to vote any way, shape, or form. People give to people running for office, and it's all shapes and sizes and all different industries and all different amounts. And they do that to lobby to try to get that person in office, and then to try to support that person while they're in office. Now, do people do nefarious things? I'm sure they do, but all I can stand on is my honesty and integrity. Do people know that I'm a land use and a property rights person and somebody who embraces growth and development? Sure, of course they do, but that doesn't change how I approach things, how I make decisions. I've never had a vote that I couldn't justify if you ask me, why did you vote that way? And the most controversial to the everyday votes that are mostly 11-0. I mean, 95% of everything we do is not partisan, and it's 11-0. It's that 5% that gets kind of controversial. But, tell me another way. It's interesting. You would get criticized both ways. If you self-finance the whole thing, they'd go, oh, well, look, you're not in touch with anybody because you just did it on your own.
The community doesn't support you.
It's a no-win situation.
Right. You
just go through it. All I can do is answer the question, be honest and open, and tell everybody exactly why I voted for what I voted for. And if, my vision for this county aligns with people, then great, so be it. But, the idea that people are buying votes is ridiculous.
Right. And if you think about it that way, if we're being honest about it, the conversation, if you think about it that way, that you are explicitly a private property, it's your property, you do what you want with it. If I'm a developer, that is somebody that makes sense that I would support. Because if I bought this piece of land and I want to do this thing on it, the private property guy is going to support my ideals on it because it's my piece of land.
And the same way that any property owner might support the property assessor, because they set, the value of your land. The same way that, a bank industry might support the trustee that has to invest a lot of money. The same way that a highway commissioner, it's on and on and on. Just because somebody believes that knows how much I believe in supporting our law enforcement, if they happen to be, in the taser business, I don't have anything to do with purchasing. I mean, I think that's the thing that people don't understand. This money doesn't go in Larsen Jay's pocket. Okay. It is a campaign. Those have real actual laws and actual rules of what you can and can't spend it on. It doesn't benefit personally in any way, shape, and form. It helps promote a brand. It helps promote a candidate. That money doesn't happen. It doesn't go into my pocket. And in fact, I lose money as a commissioner every month. I mean, I do this every year because I want to give back to the community and I want to be, part of shaping this foundation. But, this is not a moneymaker for me. This is a money loser for me. And I do it anyway because I care. But these funds you don't get to just spend them on whatever. I mean, you would get in so much trouble.
Right. I mean, it's pretty clear on the financial disclosure shows exactly where you spend it. And if some of those aren't on the approved list of things, so that'll come back, because what I find interesting, as I've learned how to do is you could, if nobody's paying attention, because
sure, if you're a dishonest person, you could cheat your way through anything or manipulate the system. But I'm not a dishonest person,
right? But I'm not saying you personally. I'm just saying, like, in the royal premise of it, it is up to the public at large to audit your financial disclosures.
And also the election commission and the state comptroller. And if somebody feels like there's some irregularities, then great, then file a report, and the state comptroller will look at your bank account. They'll look at your checkbook. They'll look at your expenditures. They'll look at all your receipts.
I'll have to reach back out to Chris Davis. I want to say I had Chris Davis in here. We were talking about that, and he said that they don't look at it unless they're asked to.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I mean, it's that me and other dorks that are into watching politics and stuff.
We call you a dork.
We might go through. I was calling everybody else a dork. I'm the not dork.
Okay.
But we'll go through it and look at it, or probably your opponents will do the same, because that's the way this game works. And they'll see one on there and they'll bring that to attention. I was reading. Anyway, that's not an important story. It's not. Anyway,
no, okay. I think. Look, at the end of the day, people have to look at you and say, do I feel like you're an honest person that is telling me the truth and being above board? And I hope when they look at me, they say, this is somebody who is dedicating a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money personally to, make this community better. And it's not going to enrich my life by any means from a financial perspective, quite the opposite.
All right. So let me go through the 5 questions. We'll do a plug segment and then we'll get you out of here. So you can go back to doing,
it's always fun to talk to you.
Doing work for free. So, all right. So my 5 questions I've been doing with everybody. If you've listened to any of the shows that I've already had, you've already heard them, but, and we've already talked about a lot of this stuff, indirectly through the conversation. But, question number 1, is this your first time running for office? We already know the answer, but we'll do that. And then question 1B is this part of your, is this the beginnings of a career in politics? Is this a step to a future seat? Do you have further political aspirations in your future? So part 1.
Part 1 is, no, this is not my first time running for office. This is my second time running for office. I was elected in 2008 countywide as a at-large commissioner, and I am seeking re-election to the same seat.
2018, but nothing before that. This is this seat that you're in right now is the first time you've run for office.
First time I've run, and second time I've run is in the exact same spot.
Gotcha. And so now moving forward is, in 26, when this, when you get maxed out as far as your commission seats, actually, random curiosity, can you run for your actual local district as a commissioner?
Only if you sit out. We have a 2-term term limit, 2 consecutive terms. So you can serve 2 terms. You could sit out for 1 term and then come back and run again, either in the existing seat that you're in or in your district. But you could not go into a 3rd term as a district, representative right away.
Right, even though you shift districts, you can't. Okay, see, that's one of those interesting little factoids. But anyway, so we come to the end of this. Is there a higher office in mind that you have? Maybe getting into one of the more bureaucratic offices, like the trustee or the clerk's office, or maybe into the mayor's office or something like that, or maybe going state level. Is that anything on your radar for your future?
It's there's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of gossip and rumors out there, and I'm flattered that people would think that I have the ability to serve on a higher level. Right now, all I'm doing is focusing on Knox County Commission and re-election and serving the community. Look, I'm somebody who's almost died twice. I don't really take time for granted. I don't plan a long time ahead, and I certainly don't, get over my skis and look ahead to the future. So I never say never, because I don't know what next year or next week is going to take. But this is not, I don't have an ambitious plan to go X, Y, Z. I work full time in the private sector. I have, charity obligations. I'd want to be a good dad and a good wife or husband, and try to, be a good community member. If opportunity arises where leadership is needed, and I can be helpful, then I'll consider it. But until then, I'm going to be a good county commissioner. I'm going to take it seriously, and I'm going to work hard every day.
All right. Number 2 is, what's your favorite ice cream, boss?
Ooh, I got to go with the chocolate with the peanut butter chunks in the chocolate. Just straight up.
I'm not mad at that.
So good.
All right. What's your favorite place to eat here in town?
I got to say Pete's Coffee Shop in the morning. And I just, I think it's because of the community that rallies around that place. I love going to Pete's.
All right. So back into real political questions. Number 4, from a voter's perspective. So do you feel like partisan elections help me, the voter, in making my decision on who the right person to select for a seat is?
I don't know the answer to that. So much of what is quote unquote partisan, and everybody has a different definition of it, are things that are argued on a state and federal level. The partisan issues don't bleed down on a local level as much. I don't know the answer. Maybe. I think for some people, it tells you, are you in their club or not in their club? Are you in their wheelhouse? But honestly, I don't think everybody thinks the same. And you can have core philosophies about who you are and what party you're in, but you can also disagree on things sometimes. So I'm just not sure it is the litmus test that drives better local government versus not having it. And I think that's a great conversation to have. That's probably a whole nother conversation.
I mean, for me personally, that's one of my big concepts, I suppose, is the best way to put it. Yeah. That I think I want to. That if I feel like I can make a real change in this, is trying to chip away at this idea of.
I think it's a great discussion. I can tell you that I don't engage in debating things that are happening on a state or a federal level that are not my wheelhouse. This is my role as a commissioner. These are my credentials. Let's talk about that. A lot of times, especially in the political clubs and everything, they want to, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Okay, that's not what I do as a commissioner, and let's focus here. So I really wish if we could just sort of focus more on what do we actually do and how do we do it? We probably would be more engaged and it would seem more important, but the dominator of national politics seems to always just sort of, drive the day. So right. I love that discussion.
Right. Because a perfect example of what you're talking about, one of the guests I had running for school board was telling me a story about door knocking, and the door that they knocked on, the person answers like, well, what do you think about abortion? It's like, well, I'm running for school board. I don't want schools to provide abortions. I don't know. It's like, but the perspective from that individual whose door that was is the only thing that I vote on is abortion or guns or X or Y, like this whole single issue voter thing, which, the R's and the D's have a specific stance on the single issue ones because that's why they're always brought up in every race. All right.
Well, and also what they do is they drive unnecessary political wedges between people for no reason. They and we've had this on commission as well. They come up with things that are not legal, not constitutional. They're statements or they're things that say, you've got to pick a side on this really big issue with no merit and no discussion because we say so. And if you're in our camp, great. And if you're out, we hate you. Like it's unnecessary. And I personally look at Betty in Halls who wants a road paved. I don't care if she's a Republican or Democrat. I serve her just the same. I would rather us really focus on that instead of trying to put litmus tests on every single person on every single issue. I'm not going to be able to engage in a conversation about North Korea, nor is it my business. I'm not going to talk about things that I can't be responsible for.
So you're telling me you don't think we should invade Russia right now? I don't understand.
If county commission has anything to do with Ukraine and Russia, then we got much bigger issues here. So, focus. Tell us how you're going to help manage growth. Tell us how you're going to manage the budget. Tell us how you're going to approach judicial appointments or fiscal policy or land use issues. Let's dig deep, but those things are really, really hard and they're complicated and they're not as easy as saying, are you for this or against that?
Right.
And I think, if we put more and more badges on people of you're all in or you're all out, then, we really are in a dangerous spot.
Right. And I think the summary of that whole thing is that for we the people, it is not a benefit for we the people the way that thing continues to be part of this game. So question 5, you're a Republican. You've been a Republican for a long time. Tell me about your favorite Democrat, whether it's one that you've worked with in commission or around the town, or whether it's a state or federal, whichever your favorite Democrat is. Tell me who it is and why you like him.
I think my favorite Democrat was probably Phil Bredesen, who was the governor of our state, who, whether you agree with all of his policies or not, he seemed to be somebody that really everybody at least had some respect for and was somebody who would listen and make the best decision and wasn't so polarizing that it alienated huge swathes of our community. And I think that's super important. I mean, I've been a Republican all my life, but I don't hate the other side. I don't hate people, and just because they're different than me, I want to debate and a meaningful discussion and find out, why do you think the way you do? How can we find some middle ground? Like, you can stay on your side and I can stay on my side, and we can fight and never get anything done. Or we can sit down and say, okay, how do we actually grow this community? How do we make it better? How do we provide for those who need our support? I mean, government shouldn't be all things to all people. We shouldn't be, the end discussion. We should be the wind in the sails and work on some basics. We should stay out of a whole lot of private sector stuff. And that's the hard part I have about government and partisan politics, is like, it's sometimes out of convenience. I really, really like for you to stay out of my business over here. Oh, but I really want you to tell all those people what to do over there. Like, it's a conflicting. I think you and I've talked about this. It's like, you can't have it both ways. And we've had some, I've gone against my party on several issues, and I've also backed them up on several issues, and and I really think at the end of the day, like, if you can have rational, thoughtful, and even passionate discussions, but you can sit down and agree to disagree in a way that's just mildly respectful, boy, will we get a whole lot more done than griping and moaning at each other every day. Right. So that's why I appreciate your podcast. You can sit here and kind of hash it out. And
I get in trouble for not being like different. Much more partisan people will start getting onto me on Facebook or Twitter or whatever about my failures to run their agenda, and it's like, no, I don't feel the responsibility. I don't call myself a journalist. I wouldn't. I hate the premise of being called a journalist. But I'm just this is my journey and trying to figure out what's going on.
But you're also willing to have the discussion, and there's been times where you and I have spoken and you've gone, "That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that direction." You've said some stuff, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of.
I know. I'm waiting for you to get my metro.
That's what good dialogue and good government and good engagement in the community is about. Is sometimes the other guy is right, and sometimes they're damn wrong. and so sit down and talk about it. Tell me why your argument's better than mine, and I'll consider it. In the meantime, these are my core values. This is my commitment to the community. This is why I'm running for office, and this is why I want to serve you. And are we always going to agree? No, but I don't want a community where we all agree on everything all the time. That sounds terrible to me.
It does sound a little boring. So website, Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff, kick that out for everybody. I'll add it to the show notes, and then I'll do an outro, and we'll have a great weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, start with larsenjay.com. All the other links are on there. You can email me directly. You can call me directly. My phone number's on there. My email's on there. Facebook, Twitter, the whole bit. If you're willing to engage in a meaningful dialogue, great. Bring it. If you're just going to throw barbs and take things out of context and be hateful, then I don't have a lot of patience for that. But in the meantime, I'm sure I'll be back on your show. We'll talk about some other great issues, and we'll keep digging through the. I mean,
I do want to take the opportunity to express my disappointment when I went to go for that stupid board of health community person, and you almost didn't give me the chance. I was mad about that, but we got it through, and it was all good. I didn't have a chance. I didn't have a chance anyway. I was there more as a lark and trying to understand what I was looking at than actually thought I would be good at the job. But anyway, it was a fun, long meeting to be a part of.
Well, indeed.
So hopefully those are past us, or the craziness that was. So Lars, I appreciate you, buddy. Have a great weekend, and we'll touch base.
Awesome. Thanks. Have a great weekend. Cheers.
All right, bye. Larsen Jay, everybody. Seat 10, County Commission at Large. He is the current seat, and he's running to keep the seat. And, I've had this close to seat 10. I've had everybody on seat 10 now. We'll follow up post-primary and do some more stuff in the future. We're almost in agreement at gmail.com. Get us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, or your favorite podcast provider. On any of those places, please like, subscribe, follow, share, retweet, whatever the thing is that helps promote whatever we're doing, so more people can hear from their people who they are electing to do jobs. And I'm going to continue trying to figure out exactly what the jobs are and who the people are that are running for the jobs. That's my goal, and that's what we do. Go to our website, almostinagreement.com. There I have my voter guide 22. That's a list of everybody running, what district they're in, links to KGIS, Knox County Election Commission, so you know which district is your district, as well as where you go to vote and that kind of stuff. And then there's links on each of the people for the shows they've done with me, as well as their own websites or Facebook pages or whatever they have available. So it's my condensed resource for you to get a hold of everything that's in front of us in this giant election coming up. That's all I got for today. You guys have a great weekend. We got a big show tomorrow, so we'll talk to you soon. Bye.